Hello and welcome to the Sophia Sessions podcast. Today's guest is Ryan Goodenough. Ryan is an advocate for young people and men's mental health. Using lived experience mixed with professional experience, Ryan works as a senior youth worker at Didcot TRAIN. In 2022, he founded HisMind, a mental health support network for men. In this episode, Ryan explains his perspective on the relationship between youth crime, identity and mental health. Ryan also talks about the role of identity and its part to play in exploitation and sensationalism of young people involved in crime. Passionate about reshaping negative and harmful assumptions, Ryan talks today about the importance of listening and working alongside these young people. This podcast episode does reference themes that may be triggering for some listeners: youth violence, knife crime, suicidal ideation, abuse, grooming and exploitation. If you are affected by anything that you hear in today's podcast, there are some organisations listed in the description below that can offer support. For any more information about Sophia, or if you want to get in touch with us at the Sophia Sessions podcast, you can email us at wellbeing@sophia.uk.com.
Yeah, so of course I'm Ryan and I'm the senior youth worker for Didcot TRAIN. We are a youth charity in Didcot. I'm also the founder of HisMind, which is a men's mental health support network. And they're two very different things, but they have a very similar purpose for me and a very similar reason as to why I've got involved with them and things like that. Youth work is a passion for me. It's the career choice that I've chosen, and it's the career choice I want to stick to. And then men's mental health was more of an opportunity to be reflective on my own personal development and where I'm at as a grown man now. So they're the two things that I do most of the time. That's what I'm about. That's what I'm up to most of the time. And today we're going to be talking about youth work and, of course, mental health, because they do link, they do run parallel with each other. So, yeah, I'm open.
Nice. I'm looking forward to it. So how did you get started in youth work? How did that all begin for you, I guess?
It was completely by chance. Completely by chance. I was working in a warehouse. I was on the loading team. And one day I was looking on Indeed.com and I saw a job as a secure care officer, and I thought, I don't know what that is, but I'm going to have a look and I'm going to apply for it. I applied for it almost half-heartedly, did the application, and then I got through, did a day of just interviews and role plays and just seeing if I was fit for the role. And I got into that. I was successful with that. I got offered a job. I did 9 weeks of training, and then I went live as a secure care officer. So effectively it is a prison officer. STC is a secure training centre for 12 to 17-year-olds sentenced or remanded to custody.
Wow.
That was my introduction to youth work, which was mental.
Yeah, that's a hell of an introduction.
Absolutely mental introduction, yeah. But I loved it. It was great. And 3 months into that, I ended up getting assaulted. I was in a coma, fractured skull, bleed on the brain, all that fun stuff. And then when I woke up from the coma, I felt, yeah, this is what I want to do for definite. This is my path type thing, because of things I experienced growing up, things I experienced from an early age and lived through, things that I did, things I was victim to, things that I was a witness of as well. It all kind of shaped me into being the person I was. It was almost that perfect transition from being a everyday 9-to-5 warehouseman into being a youth worker.
It's quite a change though, isn't it? I mean, like you say, going from that environment, maybe industrial's not quite the right words, but that, very hands-on.
It's a massive change. Just the culture is very different. You work in a warehouse, you deal with a lot of, I suppose toxicity is the right way to put it, a lot of people who can be a bit opinionated certain ways, and then when you move into a place of work where you're faced with a 15-year-old who's convicted of murder and you've got to see the child within them, it's a complete change, a complete shift in emotional approach to work and the mental approach to work and even the physical approach to work and stuff. But I really enjoyed it.
How long did you do it for?
3 months, and then of course I got assaulted, and it was a really fun 3 months. It was challenging, it was tough, but I enjoyed it. I learned a lot about myself and about the world that we live in.
What type of work did you have to do with? Was it predominantly male prison or mixed?
So we had a capacity of 84, and there was a no refusal policy, so we could accept females, but it was all young men. because we had 3 STCs across the country. There's now only one, which is the one I worked at. But the other 2 had the females in them, so they would be sent there as opposed to being sent to us. But a lot of it was just about trying to find ways to develop them, keeping them safe, keeping others safe. And when people talk about prison, they talk about being punishment. They talk about all these things around, they've got a telly, they've got PlayStation, Xbox, it's all cushy in there. It's not that at all. The punishment, which is a word I dislike, but if we're going to talk about it, the punishment has to be the loss of liberty and being removed from your family, your community, your safety net, your structure. So we were, in parts, it was all about damage limitations and ensuring that these young people did not reoffend. We had a resettlement team who were very good at working towards that. But then you're almost fighting a losing battle because you've got these 14, 15-year-olds coming in with 14, 15 years of trauma and things that have been indoctrinated into them, and then you're expected to undo that within 4 to 6 months.
Such a short period of time, isn't
100%. It's, and that's why I refer to it as damage limitations. You just do what you can and roll with it.
Yeah, use what you've got.
100%.
Yeah. I kind of, I can really see that argument towards, that sort of sentencing should be about rehabilitation, not necessarily that punishment. Because actually, particularly, those young kids, how old did you say they were?
12 to 17.
12 to 17. So the kind of rate that their brains are going to be developing and their identity, how complex that must all be. And then, like you say, you've got a couple of months to try and do what you can based on years and years and years of, trauma, really complex situations, right?
Yeah, and that's always the battle, isn't it? It's because it takes a while to build rapport and build those relationships, particularly with young people who are so anti-establishment, so against authority, and you step in with your officer uniform on and you got your clip-on tie being pulled off every day and slapped around your face, and lots of little things that just show you that their problem isn't you. Their problem is what you represent. Yeah. And when I was in court after the assault, I wrote in my VPS, my victim's personal statement, I wrote in there that they weren't fighting me, they were fighting the uniform. And I truly believe that because, it's a cauldron of all these difficult, complex emotions and thoughts and feelings, and 12 to 17 years old, you can't expect them to have everything figured out. I'm 27, I'm still trying to work things out. Yeah.
And that doesn't stop, does it?
No.
I think if you think about what those kids and young people have had to go through, and I was almost hesitant and I almost used the word chosen, but they didn't choose to go through that. In lots of situations they've been given really awful hands, right, in life. Yeah. And they've done what they have to survive. Yeah. And that's not always making the right decision. Like you say, we work with so many young people that have got themselves into really, really complex situations. 100%. And they do make choices, but they didn't choose for it to get that bad, and that's where that vulnerability and I guess what we're talking about today, that exploitation, comes in. Yeah, and
this is an argument I've had with so many people so many times, is they'll say to me, that old archaic saying, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. Yes. That really angers me. It really grinds my gears proper, because there is always a choice in life, but the choice is not always determined by us. I personally don't really believe in free will. I think there's always something, right down to as far back as you want to go, there's always something that influences something that then influences something that then influences us. So when we talk about rightfully wrong, we're talking about our perception of rightfully wrong. They differ to what other people see it. So for me now as a youth worker, I know that rightfully wrong is, if someone gets a bit aggy with you, you step back, walk away, leave it. When I was that 12-year-old kid, someone steps to me, gets a bit aggy, I'm slapping them in the face. That was my right. Now it's my wrong. And we don't give enough space for these young people to develop, to learn, and to almost adapt to what life gets thrown on them. Because we are all dealt a hand of life. Yeah. We're all given a different set of cards to play with. But we don't all live by the same rules. So how we play those cards is determined by what's around us, who's around us, and and what it is we've got to survive from.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I think, like, based on what you're saying about that perspective, you know, that is really important. And it is your life experience that gives you that perspective and the way that you see the world. And I think that is that shift that needs to happen, isn't it? Is that, like you say, when you were 12 years old, you would have made a totally different choice to the one that you would make now.
Yeah.
And that's all based on your perspective and the way that you see and interpret your world.
Definitely. I think that's why mental health is so important to me, because of that identity. You used that word earlier. Identity is so important. And, you know, I've been looking online for these websites that give you information and advice on gang exploitation, criminal exploitation, and I think on the government website they talk about the signs to look out for. It talks about a change in language, using slang words, different words being used, and then also different clothing being worn and things like that. That's all to do with identity. And then you look on the NSPCC website, you look on all these other websites, and they talk about these things which are the risks of exploitation. They talk about the dangers of it. They talk about emotional abuse being a danger of it, but they don't talk about what that really means. They don't talk about suicidal ideation. They don't talk about night terrors and PTSD. I've worked with kids as young as 13, 14 who are living with PTSD. I've worked with kids even younger. I was at one point spoken to by a 7 or 8 year old boy who was talking about wanting to kill himself. These things are all results of abuse, exploitation, grooming, but it doesn't get spoken about enough. And we look at people as perpetrators, not victims. We see the mask of the hoodie up. We see the mask of the drill music blaring. We don't see the people beneath it.
What do you think influences, like, the society that we're in terms of not talking about this stuff enough, or in the right way, perhaps? So, like you say, there's an identity element in there, isn't there? But it feels like there's a bit of a block between almost like what the outsiders see and then what's really going on. You know, why do you think that isn't spoken about enough?
I think that the society we live in is very much, it's politicized, and I'm not big on politics. I'll talk about it because it's important to be aware of it. But when we talk about politics, we're always talking right or left. We're talking blue or red. We're not talking about everything and anything. We're talking about it's either or. It can't be all, it can't be us, it's us and them, it's us v them type thing. And it just doesn't work at all. And as well, the concept of youth violence, the concept of criminality is very heavily politicized in and around general election times. We saw it in America with the presidents talking about we're going to get tough on crime. We saw it with Boris Johnson, we're going to get tough on crime. Let's increase stop and search, even though it's not proven to be effective. So it's very much a political entity as opposed to a purposeful task. So when we look at the leaders who are leading, allegedly, then we see how they're approaching it. We're going to be indifferent towards it because that, again, is being drilled into us. You look at social media, police as well on social media, their Twitter accounts will post pictures of knives. We found this in this house, we got this off this young person. The media sharing stories, and it's all sensationalism. And what it's doing there is it's showing us that the world is a scary place. So kids see that and think, hang on a minute, my community is scary. Then we go carry a knife. Then we go do this, then we go do that, and we're just perpetuating the issue. We're keeping that cycle running as opposed to cutting it. We're not breaking the cycle, and a lot of it comes from above, but then also we're not being taught it.
That's so true.
We're not learning about people. We're not learning about togetherness and things like that. And you would have seen it many times. I've seen it many times. The hierarchy needs, Maslow hierarchy needs. That again is about self-actualization. What is my peak? What is my pinnacle? It's not about us. It's about me. And I fully understand that we need to be on our own back. We need to be running our own life, in control and all these things. But we need those connections. We need those people around us to keep us sane, keep us going. And I don't think there's enough emphasis on relationships when we're raising young people. And there's so many reasons.
Yeah, I think it kind of it's making me think of, actually, we need the whole context. So when you're looking at a young person, rather than just judging them based on how they present, what they're wearing, how they're talking, you know, what music they listen to, actually, if we had that, like you say, that more kind of connectivity to the whole community, to the young people, to the relationships, then we'd be able to see beneath the surface, wouldn't we? And maybe then that's about that destigmatization of those young people. So some of the kids I've worked with over the past couple of years, you know, particularly the ones that wear like 2 pairs of trousers, like, you know, down by their ankles, like, you know, they've got the whole thing going on, and that's a massive part of their identity. They feel safe wearing that. But actually, when you get them on their own, they're vulnerable. They're effectively like, you know, their outside is strong, and it's about protecting themselves. And like you say, carrying knives. But if you can get them in a position where they trust you, you can see those little boys and girls inside them that just want to be loved, safe and accepted. It's so powerful to see that when that side of them comes out. And actually it is, you're right, it's about that connection, isn't it? Like, we've been talking a lot about this week specifically about, there's a book called Lost Connections by Johan Hari, I think his surname is. And it's all about, it's basically like new research saying depression isn't just caused by chemical imbalance. It's about a loss of connectivity to yourself, to your community, etc., etc. But it feels like that's kind of a very similar conversation in terms of the root of the problem.
Yeah, there's that old saying, isn't there? It takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
And in response to that, there's another one that says, a child not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And I use them a lot in the work I do when I'm working with young people, because they don't need to hear that. When I'm working with other professionals, reminding ourselves that we're all in this. We all need to step in and help out. And when we talk about relationships, we're kind of, like, as humans, we're like Jenga blocks, aren't we? Jenga towers, and each block is important. We've got our stability, we've got our security, we've got our confidence, we've got our self-worth and our purpose. And then on top of that, the relationships come into it. But if we haven't got the confidence, if we haven't got the self-worth, if we haven't got the purpose, if we haven't got the stability, the security, the relationships have nowhere to stand. Which is where people coming in and grooming young people, exploiting young people, they recognise that vulnerability. And I saw a question being asked on social media, which was, how are these people in gangs able to see these young people before us professionals see them? And the answer to that is simple. It's because they were part of the same cycle. They recognise it because they lived it. They were there. They were that person. Which is why I think the lived experience is so important within youth work and mental health work and gang work and stuff like that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think because then you've got a real authentic insight into actually some of the real struggles that these young people are going through. And I expect they've probably moved on a bit now from when you were younger, but, you know, still similar themes running through there, isn't there? Like you said, you've mentioned identity, which is I know something that you want to talk about today. So I guess my kind of question is, to you, based on your lived experience, what is kind of gang exploitation?
Gang exploitation is, you can remove the gang bit and just talk about exploitation, because it all kind of follows the same suit, doesn't it? And I've been saying for a while that when you look at these people being exploited for people in places like ISIS and Al Qaeda, these terrorist organizations, it's the same concept as when you're talking about people being exploited for gangs, and also when people have been exploited for other forms of criminality. And this is what I was talking about with the Jenga blocks, is that those people recognise, because they're part of that cycle, they recognise that you don't have those blocks there. So they come in and they start being all nicey nice and how you doing today? I see you struggling, people picking on you at school, tell them you know me, things like that. It's all coercive control. It's how it all starts. And then it's saying to a young person, oh, hold this, and you're giving them your really nice watch, or you like that, yeah, I'll get you one. And then that's what leads to things like debt bondage. And it's just this, there's a whole number of different techniques people use, but fundamentally it's about that relationship. Because it's that relationship that we all need in life. It's that connection that we all need in life. And if you are a vulnerable young person and you're not getting your basic needs met, someone will come and meet them for you. Yeah. And when I was looking on these websites, on NSPCC and on government website, and you're talking about the signs of exploitation and stuff, they're talking about, again, clothing, words. They're talking about not being at school as frequently. They're talking about potential bruises and all these things. They are the same symptoms of abuse, neglect, all these things. And that's why it's so important to have great communication amongst professionals. But also within the community, if it does take a village to raise a child, let's raise the child as a village. Let's all work together type thing and whatnot. So gang exploitation is the same as terrorist exploitation. It's the same as sexual exploitation, because fundamentally at the core it's all about relationships.
I see. So in terms of like that as a chosen subject, why is it important to you? And you mentioned earlier that this is something that you're really passionate about in terms of supporting young people who are either at risk of or involved. You know, why is that? Why is it so important to you that you do that?
So I grew up in a very toxic environment. I grew up in Lucy Farm, Luton. It's quite notorious, lots of things going on. I grew up around crime. I heard a lot of stories of crime. From a very young age, I was involved in crime. First got into a fight at 5 years old. Started to shoplift from the age of 8, little things like that. And then I moved to Milton Keynes at 9 years old, and then I didn't have that identity there, so I was fighting for it. Because when we talk about power, now as a grown man, I recognise that power comes with hierarchy, and you've got your CEO, you've got your manager, you've got your deputy, you've got your team leaders and all that. But as a kid, power comes with physical strength. And it's the same even to this day with young people who, if you can't fight, if you can't look tough or look menacing, you go and carry a weapon, because that's how you make yourself look tough, right? And that's what I started to do from the age of about 11. I could always fight. I could always look intimidating, whatever, but I wasn't in Luton anymore, so I didn't have my surname running things like that. So I started to carry a knife and all that stuff. And then I left school at 12 years old. And then at 13, I carried a knife again, although this time was because I was scared. I didn't know what was going on. I'd left school, I didn't know who I was, I didn't know where I was. And then that kind of left me open to be exploited. I was vulnerable. That I was what is known as a clean skin. I wasn't known to social services. I wasn't known to any local authority. I wasn't known to the police or anything like that. So if I'm walking around the streets or whatever and I'm carrying something for someone, me, a little 12-year-old boy, not known to any authority, I'm not going to get stopped. So I was always at risk of exploitation. I was never really outside of the house to be that victim of that. But when I look back, I recognise it, and I think what I want to do is be that support that I felt I needed but I never had. Because when I left school, there was only one organisation chasing me, and it was Connections. They're not about no more, are they?
No, I remember them.
Yeah, and they were really good. There was a lady there named Judith Taylor who really put a lot of effort into supporting me, and I just pushed it away because, again, I don't care about the establishment, I don't care about authority kind of thing. So when I talk about young people now getting involved with gangs, getting involved with crime and stuff like that, and we've touched on it a bit, I see the child beneath that character, beneath the persona they put out there. And I know myself as well, if I'm walking around and I've got my hood up, chances are I'm not feeling it today. I don't want to talk to anybody. Hoods up, heads down, leave me alone type thing. And these kids are walking everywhere with their hoods up, and they say trousers down, it's identity, it's a mask, it's a shield. That's how you keep people away. Because the community are not going to approach you if you're sat there on a wall outside a shop, listening to music, smoking whatever you're smoking, drinking whatever you're drinking, and they're not going to approach you. So you keep people away, and you kind of put that shield around you, that bubble around you. And I'm all about popping those bubbles. Yeah. I want to I want to come in, say hello, see who you are as a person. I don't care that you're on this, I don't care that you're on that. And it's something I've spoken to young people about before, is that they say to me, we're not scared of you. I don't want you to be scared of me. Walk around any place in the country and not be scared. Congratulations, well done. Now walk anywhere in the country without respect. It's a whole different matter. And that's what it's about for me. It's about building that respect and showing the young people, I see through this facade. Come talk to me, type thing. So that's why it's important to me, because I see myself in a lot of these young people.
And I guess that's based on like what you have been through. It's really interesting when you were talking about that lady who helped you, Judith, and actually it sounds like what she was trying to provide is those building blocks, the ones that were missing for you and potentially putting you quite at risk. And these young people, like you say, like yourself, like, I mean, every young person I know, they see any sort of kind of professional, anyone that works in youth work, right, initially as the other because of what they've been through. So you're right, it is like bursting those bubbles and breaking through them. And I think a lot of people might feel scared to do that. They might feel intimidated, and that's because, like you say, the outer shell that these young people kind of, they misrepresent themselves, don't they, really? And in some respects, yes, it's protection, isn't it? But it's also, you know, it's a wall that people don't necessarily always want to kind of break down until, you know, people like you and your job kind of come in and knock it down and say, let's just get rid of all this. I want to get to know you. And
again, that's to do with the sensationalism you see within the media and the perception of drill music as well. And so I'm not a fan of drill music, not because I think it is poison, but because I grew up on old school hip hop and I like the more relaxed, poetic type music and whatnot. But when you look at drill music as an art, you see it's developing language. These onomatopoeic words like ching, for example, of meaning to, you know, stab someone. It's a really clever way of using language. And I think when we look at it as art and when we look at it as a representation as opposed to an influence, we see it a little bit differently. And then when we look at it as a story, a lot of the people who jump up on mic start chatting about, I did this, I done that, they're just waffling. Plain and simple, they're waffling. But that's because trauma sells. You look on Netflix, Jeffrey Dahmer documentaries about this person, that person. You've got films being made about the Cray twins. Trauma sells, and it sells to people who aren't in that environment. So, for example, I work with a young person and I put on a song one time. Immediately, he reached for my stereo, paused it, said, no, I can't listen to that. I was like, what do you mean we can't listen to that? I said, they're my ops. I said, oh, okay, yeah, cool. You don't get that around places like here. It's again that identity. They kind of feel that connection with the music and almost living vicariously through them. They're feeling tough and they're feeling empowered because I can walk along listening to some man chatting about chefing, man, and re-te-te. But really, they're just trying to be something that they ain't, because it's about that identity. It's about that feeling something. And then again, we look at the sensationalism within the media, and one thing that I look at is Jack the Ripper, most infamous person of history, whatever. He stabbed people to death. He's celebrated. He's got books about him. He's got films about him. And I appreciate the anonymity of him or her is appealing. But when someone on road or whatever stabs someone, their face is all over the media and it's all about devil, thug, horrible child, all this, all that. And a lot of it, I feel, stems from classism within the country and also racism within the country. I think that is a huge reason for the perception of these young people. And when you look at stories being shared on social media, you'll always see underneath in the comments, I see diversity is going well, mass immigration is going well. Let's not get into that topic because I'll talk forever, and I try to not respond to them all because it just wastes my energy. But it's important that we recognise that this whole notion of black on black crime is complete nonsense. Glasgow is known as murder capital of the UK. It's a predominantly white area. It's again about identity. And then when you look at black on black crime as what the narrative is, what you're actually seeing is proximity crime. Because of, you know, after the World War II in 1948, we had the British Citizenship Act, 1948, which is where anyone in a British colony or the empire can come over and claim citizenship as long as they did a labour job.
Right.
And that's when they come over on the boat known as Windrush.
Mm-hmm.
And then we throw them into these communities and we just completely forget about them. And we leave them to be stuck in these communities that we're not funding. And when they are being funded, they're being gentrified and they're being pushed out. You see it in Hackney. Hackney got moved towards Tottenham. Hackney and Tottenham formed this massive rivalry. Yeah. You're seeing it in places like Camden. We're not removing the issue, we're moving the issue.
Oh, that's interesting.
So when you talk about black on black crime, when you talk about mass diversity, people ain't talking right. They're not talking about gentrification. They're not talking about Windrush. They're not talking about proximity crime. And I think a lot of these things play a huge part in how we perceive young people.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, actually. And it's coming back to that concept of actually these young people and those communities have been disconnected, haven't they? Been disconnected from their roots, and they're finding that connection, which is a basic core human need in things like the music, the drill music. There's so many like Netflix documentaries on it now, and even series like is it Top Boy?
Yeah,
stuff like that's kind of, it seems to be becoming increasingly popular, like particularly over the last maybe 5 years, I'd say.
A lot of that is, again, sensationalism. I know people who grew up around real things like that, and they tell me that Top Boy is cool, it's somewhat genuine, but there's a lot of things being exaggerated because, again, that's what sells, right?
Yeah.
That's what sells. And when we talk about young people, when we talk about particularly young black people and the representation that they have, you look at all these movies, you look at all these TV shows, the black people are always the protagonists of violence. They're the ones who are the criminal and all this stuff. We need to change that narrative almost and bring in black leaders. And you look around London, there's so many great organisations. Mentivity is one. You've got Armani Simpson, who does a lot. You've got an author called Robin Travis, who I know very well. He is amazing at what he does. He teaches creative writing and things like that. You've got a man named Justin Finlayson who goes around on his bus and has a youth club in the bus and goes to the community. United Borders, they're called. There's all these amazing black leaders and you see it now on TV with Brenda Edwards on Loose Women. Mm-hmm. You see it on DJs on radio shows, Yinka Bikini, who was a real good friend with Damilola Taylor, who was, of course, stabbed to death when he was 10 years old. So we're seeing a lot more of a shift now, which is amazing. But again, it's met with racism. It's being accused of being tokenistic. It's been accused of being, we can't have white people on telly anymore. And there's some research that come out recently that states there is a direct link between mental health difficulties of mental health disorders, but also learning difficulties. There's a link between that within black people and experiencing racism from a very young age, because the way the brain is wired develops differently. And as a white person, I can't feel that, I can't connect to that, which is why representation is so important, which is why we need more awareness in areas that are like Oxfordshire and like all these other nice little areas. We need people to be aware, we need people to be represented, we need people to be heard, we need people to be listened to, and that's people as people, not people as white boy, not people as black girl, not people as anything or anyone. It has to be people as people, because what has to come first is the person before the behaviour. And
I think it goes back to that saying, behaviour is communication, isn't it? Actually, these young people are behaving this way for a reason. They're trying to communicate something. Whether they're conscious of it or not is a different story, depending on their development, right? And self-awareness. I think, going back to that conversation we were having around perspective, a 12-year-old is not going to have the same self-awareness and emotional intelligence as the 27-year-old sat here, right? But yeah, I think I completely agree. I think representation is so important, particularly in our community. Obviously, we both work in Didcot. Yeah. The percentage of, I read a study, is the percentage of non-white people in Didcot was something like 4% in 2020. So it's a really, really, it's an area that's highly populated by white British people, effectively. And so that's why I think for us, as people who work with young people, that representation is important, and these conversations do have to happen.
100%.
To educate ourselves as much as anything,
100%. And the world is always changing, it's always developing, communities are always adapting, and I think there's a very old style, archaic way of thinking for people in that, well, it worked this many years ago, it'll work this time as well. Things change, and we hear it all the time. I hear it from my dad, and you may hear it from your parents, that whole, well, back in my day, don't worry about your day, things are different now.
This is my day.
You could afford a house on minimum wage. Like, things are different now, innit?
Yeah.
And I think we need to adapt, we need to move with the times, we need to make things more relevant.
Yeah, that is it, isn't it? It is relevance. And also I do think it's all relative. There's totally different issues now than there was 30, 40, 50 years ago. Like, look at social media. That's like probably the most obvious example I can think of. The impact of social media on all this stuff, like you were saying, the media's representation of these young people involved in crime, and that kind of, you're right, it is an epidemic. Like, the amount of stuff you see in the media at the minute is just, it's astonishing, isn't it?
One thing that I see in the media a lot is, again, it's about that sort of perception of importance based on race. We look at Ben Kinsella, who was stabbed to death in 2008, all over the news. He's a white boy from quite a well-off family. Not to dismiss his death, it's a horrific crime no matter who is the victim. But the way I see it is, nobody wins, not the victim, not the perpetrator, not the family of the perpetrator, not the family of the victim. But that was national news. There are people being stabbed so often, it's become normalised, and it's not causing this big outrage anymore. And Damilola Taylor was 10 years old. Stephen Lawrence was stabbed to death. And they become big cases because they had to fight for that justice. But there's other ways you can look at it, of course. There's always about perceptions, always about how you see things. But when you look at these stories and the response to them, you see the white boy being stabbed to death. It's horrific. Such a shame. Horrific. Bad stuff. There's a black boy being stabbed to death. Oh, well, he was probably stabbed by another black boy. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to shift that narrative. And we can't do it because we're just two people that work in Didcot, which is, again, it comes back to that it takes a village to raise a child. And I think the media have got a lot, they play a big part in all of this. And social media as well. Snapchat is so commonly used because of it. The messages
disappear, don't they? Yeah,
and you screenshot it, you're then showing them that you've screenshotted it, and it's a very, very much used resource for people doing the exploiting and stuff like that, because messages, evidence all gets deleted. It's not encrypted like WhatsApp is, and things like that. So yeah, the world is different now.
It is. It really is, isn't it? I think, and like we obviously touched on social media earlier, but thinking about the young people that we're talking about today, the impact of all this on their mental health. Like, it's just, like you say, these young people, that's a big generalisation. I think I want to be cautious when I say that, but the types of young people that we're talking about here, there is that perception of them being perpetrators, not victims. And I think there needs to be a shift in that. And I think Snapchat, it's had its improvements, right? But it's still such a platform for young people to be exploited so easily. Like, the privacy restrictions are minimal, and they can add anybody they want. They can add strangers, they can add anybody who fulfills those building blocks, right?
And Snapchat really bothers me. I'm sure you'd have seen it. There's fights going on in town, and let's film it, let's share it amongst our peers, and all that stuff. I don't think young people quite realise that they are holding evidence, and it is. But there's a rapper named Chip, formerly known as Chipmunk. He's got a song called Good Morning Britain, and in that he talks about what side of the knife do you want to be on. Stab or be stabbed, pick a side of the knife. You didn't see it like that, right? And then he talks about young people as well with Snapchat. He talks about sometimes I want to be a father, then I don't, because when I look around, it's like humanity is ghost. The era of the iPhone, there isn't any hope. See you dead, open Snapchat before they check your post.
Wow.
And those kind of words really ring true, because if you see someone getting beaten up, getting stabbed, whatever, phone out, let's film it. And that doesn't get shared anywhere to police, whatever, nothing. It's just amongst them and their friends because, hey, you see what this happened? And it's all over social media. Mm-hmm. Recently, there was the video of that young black girl who was assaulted outside the school.
Yeah.
It was an awful thing. And I don't like watching those videos because I just don't like looking at violence. I had a very violent upbringing, and it just brings back a lot of thoughts. I can't for 1 second imagine how it feels for someone who experienced violence and racism to watch those videos. And that's all because it was filmed, it was shared, it wasn't reported. The police come into it because of that video.
Yeah.
Some of them either we don't believe the accusations, or we don't have anything to go on, whatever reason it may be. But there's pros and cons to social media. If that wasn't shared on Twitter, another social media platform, or Instagram or Facebook, it wouldn't have had the response it's had.
Yeah.
But then if it wasn't for social media, there's pros and cons to everything. I could talk forever. Yeah. I really could.
It is though, you're right, because it is that, it does happen within the circles, doesn't it? And the videos do get shared around. And, you know, we've seen some of them and they're incredibly distressing to watch. But there is that element, again, coming right back to identity where we started today, is that there's a reason why these aren't being shared. There's a reason why young people don't want to speak up about this, even if it's happening in their own communities. Because, like you say, you were talking about those lyrics, which side of the knife are you on? That unfortunately, it seems, I don't know how you feel about this, and obviously feel free to challenge me on it, but it does feel like there's a binary. It's either you're in or you're out. And that becomes the identity, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I do. I think there's a lot of nuances and complexities within any argument that you put forward.
Sure.
But when you look at things as black and white, when you look at things as either or, left or right, yes or no, you then open up that umbrella to experience and establish the microcosms within. And when we talk about the young people, if you either stab or be stabbed, whether we see it differently or not, the young people don't, because they don't perhaps have the skills to see it that way. They don't perhaps have the understanding of what it could mean. And I know me, when I was out carrying a knife, if someone was to step to me with a knife, I'm acting before I'm being dealt with. Plain and simple. I now know, as an older person, because of the experiences, I know where to move, I know how to move, I know what parts to be. Like when I'm back in Luton seeing family, I know the area and whatnot. So you kind of learn. But for these kids to learn, it's almost like we're expecting them to be stabbed. It's almost like we're expecting them to witness a stabbing, to witness a shooting, to witness a murder, and things like that. There are kids in certain areas like London, Coventry, Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham. There are kids in these areas that are witnessing a murder before they're even leaving primary school. And you expect them to be fine with that because there's a 4-year waiting list for all these mental health supports, and there's nothing being done because the community is not responding, the community is reacting, and the community are seeing this story and they're not thinking of the bigger picture. They are just going straight in on the perpetrator. You're scum, you're vile, you're this, you're a thug. They're not seeing that the family, the mum is crying her eyes out because the kid's just been sent down. They're not seeing that the brother or the sister has lost their sibling and they now don't have anyone to play fight with, to talk to, don't have anyone to go for advice for. They're not seeing the bigger picture.
It's where those dots come in, isn't it? Like building the whole picture up together and connecting the dots. And I think I feel parts of our society and parts of our community are quite reactive. I think obviously there has been money put into early intervention, right? But I also think, definitely speaking to like the older generation, people in my family, friends of friends, whoever it might be, there's a reluctance to believe that young people as young as 7, 8, 9, 10 are involved in this stuff, are self-harming, are, runners, are being groomed. Like, there's a real resistance to that. No, they're too young. No, that's impossible.
Yeah.
But it's terrifying how young it's getting, isn't it? It's actually scary how young it's getting. And I think that's why, like you say, we need to be real and have these conversations. Like, this is happening. Let's not ignore this. Yeah. Like you say, you and I can't fix the world right now. We're just having a chat. Yeah. But it's that exposure to these conversations, right? And that's building trust with young people.
100%, and that's where the education comes from. And yeah, we can't change the world, but we can try and change one person's world, and that's how I see it. Small win is still a win, and we need to educate and stuff like that. Little words like tinies, for example. Gangs recruit people as under the age of 10 because they can't be nipped, they can't be arrested. You can't be arrested, you can't speak. You can't speak, they can't be caught. But they don't have these conversations because it's... So I have spoken with other professionals, I've spoken with parents, I've spoken with people, and I've said to them, I would love to go into primary schools and teach about consent. Doesn't have to be sexualized. Let's just talk about, if your friend says stop tickling them, don't tickle them. Yeah. If your friend says they don't want a hug, don't give them a hug. If your friend says they don't want a drink, don't make them a drink. I also want to go in and talk about relationships, because then you can talk about, if this older person comes and asks you to carry something for them, run away and find the nearest adult. Things like that. Yeah. Because I know of someone, his name is Sefton, I don't know his surname, but he does a lot of youth work in London. His story is, and I may have got it a bit wrong, but his story is incredible. He was, from the age of 8, being groomed into selling drugs, and he didn't realise what was happening until he saw someone he gave the drugs to frothing at the mouth and collapsed on the floor, and he ended up trying to leave, and at the age of 11 he had to form his own gang because he was being targeted. Wow. So now, I'm getting my own people behind me. It's crazy how young it's happening, but we turn a blind eye to it. Yeah. We turn a blind eye to it because they're just children, right? We can't talk to them about gangs. We don't want to scare them.
That's exactly it. Yeah, it's not wanting to make them scared, isn't it?
It's about making them aware. Nobody wants to scare a child, but nobody wants to lose a child either. So you got to weigh it up. Which one would you prefer?
Yeah, definitely. I think that is a really interesting, like you say, that's like going right back to the roots, isn't it? Let's talk about consent relationships, what to do if, understanding that these are the needs you've got as a kid, obviously in simpler language, but these are the needs you've got. This is how you meet them. If they're not being met, this is what you do. And helping them develop their emotional literacy. But I believe it's having those relationships with professionals, so that, like, you and I work with young people all the time. If you give that young person time and you don't judge them and you don't make assumptions about them, they will open up, they will be real with you. Yeah. And that's how you support them, isn't it?
100%. And so when we talk about no judgment, I see things a bit differently, because I believe we should judge, but we should judge constructively.
Interesting.
I think that if we approach a young person, it's the same with being risk averse. You can't remove risk, so let's be risk sensible. And when you go to a young person and say that I'm not going to judge you, we judge everyone. Everyone judges something or someone. It's just human nature. And as well, we need to make a judgment on the story they share with us to be able to be constructive in our response to it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's kind of how I approach things. But when we work with young people, it's so important to just, as you say, be that person, be that consistent. And if a young person throws something at you and tells you where to go, take it, come back the next day.
Yeah, leave that door open.
Yeah, and there comes a point where you think, you know what, they're not liking me. They don't like me. Let me just step out and get someone else and change your face perhaps. Yeah. But the first time I meet a young person, I don't sit down and we're not talking. So tell me about your life. It's, how's your week been? What do you like? Things like that. I'm covered in tattoos, and in my last job and in this job as well, I'd sit down and I'd give the kids colouring pens and felt tips, and they're just colouring my tattoos. And I'm just there being coloured in, and it's amazing because the kids feel so relaxed. And then the next time they see you, it's, oh, Ryan, how you doing? You're all right? Because you're building that relationship. You're showing them that you're approachable. Yeah. And things like that. And it's also just using you as a person to be a tool for change. Yeah. And I think that's so important. And it's the only thing I would say to the young people is do not colour in the tattoos on my head, because I can't cover them up. You know what I mean? But
not unless you got your hat on.
Exactly. But it's these kids, they need that connection. And
you do, yeah.
If that means taking 3 to 4 weeks for them to build a trust. The conversation will happen when it needs to happen. You plant the seed will grow when it's ready to grow.
Yeah.
We don't always get to see that tree grow, but as long as we know we've planted the seed.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's such a good way to look at it. And like you say, because of the type of work we're in, we don't always get to see that, do we? But you're right, it's about breaking down that barrier between them and us, isn't it? That authority that young people kind of perceive professionals with, and being able to sit there as a professional with all your, your kind of safeguarding, your professional boundaries, all of that. They don't need to know that. They don't need to see that. What they need to see is a human in front of them willing to listen and give them the time, right? Yeah.
And that's why every young person who works with me knows that I'm going to tell you to stop being an idiot. I'm going to tell you why you're being an idiot, and I'm going to tell you how to stop being an idiot. So I kind of work on I don't have a fancy name for it. We call it the World Wide Web system because it's WWW. W for what, the other W for why, and then the other W for where. So what's happened? Why has it happened? Where do we go from here? I don't care that you've done this. I don't care you've done that. We're going to use it. We're going to mold it, and we're going to build from it. Because as you've mentioned, behaviour is communication. So what you communicate with me, let's work that out together. And it's about providing them with the tools to do it, not just throwing them at them and saying, all right, go and work it out. It's doing it with them and building up those blocks with them so they can then see where blocks fit, how blocks feel, and what the purpose and benefit of each and every block is.
For sure. And then I guess by doing that, you're giving them the opportunity for growth, aren't you? And it's not about punishments. Like you say, kids being in, like you say, situations that are kind of criminal. But if you can sit with a young person who's involved with that and be the one person that doesn't, give them a hard time about it, there's a very big difference between sitting someone down and giving them a hard time, being able to be like, right, what are you doing? You're being an idiot, but I'm still here. Let's work through this together. There's such a difference in that, isn't there?
And I think it's about channeling their skill set.
Yeah.
And it's there's this saying that I see, and it's, if you can film a street fight, you can film a movie or a music video. If you can write a rap song about talking of madness, you can then write a book. If you can run a gang, you can run a business. Don't take over the block, take over the world. And it's one of them ones that's so important. I've worked with young people who are so low in belief in themselves. They think, I can't do nothing, or this or that. I can just sell drugs. All right, cool. Talk to me about how you bag up. Talk to me how you price up. Talk to me about the fractions and the decimals and all that. And it's so we've got one bag here. We break it, we cut it. Numbers.
Yeah, and then you can develop that skill more constructively.
100%. And I don't believe in code switching. The thing where you try and act like something you're not because of the environment you're in. I'm always going to be the council estate kid from Luton, no matter who I'm talking to or talking with. But what I do teach the young people, or try to let them know, is that it's not about going in and being something different. It's about going in and being the best you. And I think that's so important, and building up those blocks of self-esteem, worth, purpose, confidence, and even courage. And something that I say, and I recognise it's very pretentious, I recognise it's potentially cliched, and I do hold my hands up to that. But one thing I do say is, do not be suffocated by the fear of failure. Instead, be motivated by the courage it takes to try. And that's something that I live by, because we can all fail, we can all learn. And instead of being scared, instead of seeing fear as a concept of an emotion, see it as the 4 letters, F, E, A, and R, and you can forget everything and run, or you can face everything and rise. I'm a very cliched person, honestly.
I love it. You're banging these out.
But that's how I taught myself, innit? I learnt by watching Fred Hampton. I learnt by watching Martin Luther King, listening to Bob Marley, and even now in modern day, Nipsey Hussle and people like him, and then a bit earlier on with Tupac and stuff like that. People who are real community leaders. They had their problems. They were associated with this, that, the other. Cool, but they had a purpose to their words. And I said to you as we're walking up the stairs, I don't like people who just talk for the sake of talking, because at that point you're just waffling and making noise. I need substance to my words, otherwise it's just a waste of my energy. And I think that, you can construct a great argument just by using quotes. And that's how I live by it. So I will stand by my cliche quotes.
I think they're cliche for a reason, and people do relate to them. Like something we always say here at Sophia is, feel the fear and do it anyway.
Yeah. Embrace it.
Yeah, just like use it as a motivation, use it as a step up, and then, like you say, look at what blocks have I got, how can I build these blocks, which blocks are missing, etc., etc.
Like what blocks are gonna give me this step out of this box of fear and things like that. And I do think that young people know deep down what they want in life. Some are just too scared to say it because they don't want to get laughed at and all that. I knew a young person who was a convicted, I think it may have been murder or possibly attempted murder or at least manslaughter, and he wanted to be an architect. I says, all right, cool, you're inside for the next 17 years. Train to be an architect. Do it.
Use the time.
Yeah, that type of thing. So, again, we talk about identity. I'm this boy, I've got my tracksuit and I've got my hood up. I can't be chatting about wanting to draw buildings and stuff. Nah, forget about all that. Don't worry about who people think you are. Worry about who you want to be. And I think it's about that mindset. And I've been saying for ages, if you change your words, you change your mindset.
Yeah.
Change your language, you change what you're hearing.
Yeah, for sure. I also think it's about the space that you're in 100%. With a young person. So if you can provide them with a space where they can drop that identity in terms of the outside identity that they feel they have to keep up for protection, right? If you can give them a space where they can come in and talk about drawing, talk about how much they love their family, talk about, it could be anything, but subjects that kind of are rooted in emotion, and you can see the passion when these young people talk. Like, it's beautiful actually to watch 100%. A young person come in and drop all this stuff, 100%. And you can have such real conversations with them. Like, I remember I was chatting to a lad last year, and he came in and he was going on about all this stuff. And I said, just drop it, it's fine. I was like, just be you for like 5 minutes, let's just chat. Just drop all this act. I know it's an act. And that was a risky move because that could have gone real bad. Yeah. But he did. And he started talking about how much he loved his little sister and how much, she meant, being really, really emotional. And for a young lad, I think he was like 14, 15, that was massive. And it just proved to him that he could do that and that was safe and nothing bad was going to come from that. 100%.
And I think so you look at the fire triangle of Hoth, heat, oxygen and fuel. You remove one of those elements, there's no fire. As humans, we're the same. We also have our triangle, and that is emotion, environment and trigger. Trigger is a lot like the fuel. It's there. Once it's ignited, we can't really do much about it because the trigger's been and gone, the fuel's been and used. But emotion, we can teach them how to manage emotions. Same way we can teach them how to adapt to their environment. And as well, there's this old belief people talk all the time, don't they, about fish out of water. Why are we keeping fish out of the water? They suffocate, right?
Yeah.
And there's almost like this way of working in that we teach young people to swim in poisonous water. Let's teach young people to change the water. And that's why I talk to young people a lot about anger, is emotions, environment and trigger. Trigger's been and gone, you're already angry. We're already past that point in the escalation cycle. Let's talk about the environment. Okay, you're in school. You can't walk out of school. You can walk out of class, but you might get re-triggered. So it's again the cycles. Okay, so let's manage your emotions. How do you feel? And then we give them the skills to understand those emotions, and we give them skills to respond, not react.
A big thank you to Ryan for coming on to the Sophia Sessions podcast today. So great to have someone who's so open about their experiences, working towards supporting young people. Very much looking forward to working with you in our community in the future.
If you would like to get in touch with us at Sophia or just find out a little bit more about what we do, please do check out our website. The link will be in the description below.